Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Welcome to the second week of Capital Outlook here in Cheyenne. My name is Craig Blumenshine with Wyoming PBS. Thank you for joining us. Revenue is the topic that's been discussed a lot here this week in the Wyoming legislature, and we'll visit with the two chairmen of the revenue committees of both the House and the Senate, Representative Dan Zwonitzer and Senator Cale Case. We'll ask them to reflect on the updated Consensus Revenue Estimating Group's report that was released this week here in Cheyenne. The news was not all good. We'll also visit with Representative Albert Sommers. He's our Capital Outlook profile, and we were able to visit with him before the session at his beautiful ranch south of Pinedale. We'll also be updated from the leadership of the Wyoming legislature from Senator Drew Perkins. He's the Senate President, and Speaker Steve Harshman. And finally, we'll meet and visit with the new auditor of the state of Wyoming, Auditor Kristi Racines, in her first televised interview. All that's next on Capital Outlook, starting now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And as we begin our second week of Capital Outlook from here in Cheyenne, I'm pleased to be joined by Senator Cale Case and Representative Dan Zwonitzer, both chairmen of the revenue committees for the House and for the Senate.
New chairman.
New chairman,
both
yes.
New chairman.
Welcome to you both. Senator Case, you've been on the committee for quite several years before. Representative Zwonitzer, this is your first swing at the revenue committee.
First time on the committee in 15 years.
Yeah,
Large learning curve.
And there's lots to talk about. At the top of the list certainly is the January update to the October revenue report that it's called the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group puts out, was released this week. What were your thoughts when you read the report?
So my initial thought in October that the report was a little rosier than what we were looking at, the 3 to 5 year picture. So in the January came out last week and said we're 67 million less than projected. It wasn't a huge shock to me. The good news is we're still $150 million higher than we were last February when we left here. So still some good news, but I don't think it was a huge surprise to a lot of us who followed the Craig report over the years.
And certainly for all of us who watched oil prices and gas prices, this certainly impacted this update, Senator.
And that's the driver here, is that really, gas prices have been fairly shallow, oil prices are dropping. That's beginning to affect very directly the money we get for severance tax, because that's based on the value of the oil produced. Down the road, it'll begin to affect things. If it causes a slowdown in the industry, which is possible, then it could begin to affect the sales tax area as well, which is one of the bright spots in this, Craig. But I'm not predicting we'll show promise if this oil downturn continues.
Where are you at today? What can you share with our viewers on what this committee's charge is? What is it now that you're trying to do relative to revenue for the state of Wyoming?
Trying to get our 60 members to talk about their personal thoughts, their thoughts of their home districts. Certainly some legislators say a sales tax increase might be the way to go. Others say their part of the state, maybe property would be better. And so looking at the wide range, especially having a very diverse committee in the House this term, we're from all over Wyoming and pretty geographically spread out. It's been difficult not only to find consensus in our 9-member committee, you balance out with what you can get through the entire 60-member House and, the desires of leadership on what kind of should be the broad push this session.
We'll talk about specifics here in just a little bit, but Senator, where do you think this Joint Revenue Committee and the Senate Revenue Committee should be thinking about right now relative to revenue?
Well, let's start at the beginning a little bit and decide, why do we need more revenue? And should we even go down that road? The truth is, though, when we left last year, we left a structural deficit on the table. We don't collect enough in revenue to pay for the government that we've decided to provide. So that's a problem. And either we're going to correct that by reducing government expenditures, or we're going to need more revenue, because basically we're going through our reserves by a fairly astonishing rate. People are surprised how fast we are. So then the choice becomes, if we're going to have this level of government, we're going to need to fund it, and in a sustainable basis. And so there is a wrapped up in that is the fact that you mentioned earlier, we're very dependent on the mineral industry, especially the fossil fuel-based industry. So are we going to try to move away from that over time? That kind of drives what you think about with respect to revenue. You don't need any if your budget's in balance, unless you just want to broaden your tax base and perhaps put some money away or reduce taxes on other people. But our budget's not in balance, and we have this unique in the U.S., except for possibly Alaska, dependence on fossil fuels.
So the question becomes, who drives that discussion forward? I could have asked that question 10 years ago, I think. But we have your committees, and then we also have House Bill 126, of which you're both sponsors of, which is called the Revenue Recalibration Task Force, which would put into play, if it's successful, it's out of House committee, will be debated in front of the full House first, a committee with 5 appointees, if I recall, from the governor, 3 from each body, to, is it revitalize the Tax 2000 document that was created years and years ago, as Representative Kirkbride talked about this morning?
The real importance of the bill is to have a focal point and a starting place. So you can imagine in politics, every 2 years we get a change in leadership, a change in members who have different philosophies and ideas, and certainly our revenue picture is so volatile. How much of a deficit we're in for the last 3 years changes pretty quickly between oil and gas or investment income. And so having a really in-depth look and something to focus on with some solid recommendations, I think that's what the Tax Reform 2000 Committee did 20 years ago. And it's still referenced today that back in 2000, here is, after a long exhaustive study, what we thought the future of Wyoming should look for and what type of taxing mechanisms we should look at. So having that kind of rebalance and that renewed conversation 20 years later, I think is really important for the legislature as a whole, because of the volatility and just the dynamic nature of Wyoming politics. We can have that guiding document, hopefully, for another 20 years.
Is now the right time, Senator, to do this in-depth study about the state's revenue needs?
It's probably too late, but I don't mean literally too late, but it's very important that we understand where the revenue comes from, what our possible solutions are, because solutions take a long, long time to implement, and even trimming government takes a long, long time to implement. So I think it's good to have these discussions. I welcome having it more formalized. It ought to be able to focus people on what we need to be focusing on right now. I welcome it. It'll be a bureaucratic exercise perhaps, and some people will think it maybe doesn't do anything, but if it sharpens our focus in these areas, that would be very good. What we don't want it to do, though, is to allow it be an excuse for us not to do anything now, because we're going to be looking into it.
And this report would be due in July of 2020, if I recall. One of the thoughts was voiced at the committee meeting earlier this week is that, no, you know what, this should be the lift of the revenue committees, that we don't need another study to do this. Is that a valid concern?
I think the difficulty with the revenue committee historically is you have a bill in front of you and everybody against that bill comes out against it. Right, so whatever you're trying to tax or modify their rate, you don't get a lot of people showing up saying, yeah, maybe we could pay more here. And so you just have all these ducks and you shoot them down one by one, where if you have to look at it systematically and holistically and say, where is the agreement? So if you don't like this tax, what do you think about this, and have to weigh those against one another? I think that's really the value in a committee long-term to look at this as a guiding document. Instead of every tax that comes up, let's shoot it down because it gores someone's ox. You have to take those and balance against one another and say, what's the future of Wyoming going to look like? Are we still going to be a mineral-based economy? Can we diversify? And taking all those into account, I think, is the real importance of a thorough look at everything in conjunction with one another.
Believe me, my whole world has changed, though. People are very unhappy with even talking about things that you have to be a little bit more
It's a hard
broad-minded.
discussion to have. I mean, just to be frank, in Wyoming, it just is, and I think your predecessors have proved that. So this will be interesting to see where this travels.
And they're not here anymore either.
Well, one retired and one was elected out. I mean, they're absolutely true. So a new chapter, if you will. So the lodging tax is marching forward in this legislature. It didn't come to the Revenue Committee, though. Why was that? Do we know?
I think when the speaker talked to the chairman, we really looked at all the revenue bills coming forward. And I talked to the speaker. There was a lot of thought that, you know, the new chairman of revenue shouldn't be up there on 11 different bills and taking all the slings and arrows. And so the lodging tax does really affect economic development. I had a lot on my plate, and so the speaker said, hey, let's take one to the Minerals Committee. They're saving a lot of fun tax bills for the Revenue Committee coming forward, but I think that was the speaker's concern, is you don't want to put the revenue chairman up there every time having to push for a tax increase. Certainly is not my favorite place to be, but again, felt after 15 years in the House, it kind of fell on my shoulders as the next senior member to take on that role that not a lot of people want to step forward to be the chairman of the Revenue Committee.
Senator, what should our viewers expect relative to revenue successes in this legislature? Are you optimistic about your work or pessimistic?
Well, most of the revenue bills probably will die. There's one that I helped to advance through the interim committee, which is actually a mill levy increase, a property tax increase on everything but minerals. And the reason I did that is I wanted to put people to look at that and put in perspective the amount of taxes borne by the mineral industry in Wyoming, but I also wanted to show that what you could do with, for example, a wind tax, which could raise the same amount of money potentially as that mill levy. And the mill levy is not going anywhere. I guarantee everybody, so you don't have to write me anymore, but I think it did achieve its purpose to get it forward to say, wow, this is what it would cost to raise this amount of money, and yet we could do a different kind of tax and send most of it out of state. That's pretty cool. So we need to discuss wind tax more. Other things, we're still trying to get after the very large retail presence in Wyoming whose earnings are taxed in other states. Money they make in Wyoming is taxed in other states. We've got a bill coming forward that'll maybe address that. There's another bill with respect to corporate fees that'll raise a little bit of money. There's a proposal, and I think it's still alive, to actually lower the state sales tax rate but broaden its application. That's got some merit, and there's some support over on my side of the building. So look for things in that area. Those are more tweaks.
When you say broadening the application, to me that translates to maybe taxing services in the state of Wyoming.
There's absolutely true. There's two major categories of exemptions. One is a sales tax on manufacturing equipment, which would come out and
to encourage manufacturers to be here.
That's the purpose of that tax, but I will point out that most manufacturing equipment that's used and purchased in Wyoming is for mineral production. So it's for captive plants. Whether that tax break is there or not, those investments have to be made where the minerals are. And so that doesn't necessarily solve the problem of being dependent on the mineral industry, but I think that's an abused tax break, if you want to know. I don't think it really does any good. The second thing is going to be very controversial. It's about the tax on food, which is in many of our rural areas of Wyoming and smaller towns, that's about all they sell. And when people go other places for big retail purchases, they still probably buy food in their local communities. So to reinstate the sales tax on food is very controversial, but I do think that's going to be very important to rural communities because that's the only thing that's left that they sell.
Representative, what about you? If you could give me your crystal ball and tell me in 30 days what bills might have made it out to enhance revenue in Wyoming?
So I think we'll be successful if we get a lodging tax through, if we get, it's called the National Retail Fairness Act, and we are able to charge some of those retail sellers who should already be paying the tax. We just don't have a way to collect it. We have a bill, House Bill 69, to begin collecting that tax. It's another $7 million.
And that tax is actually paid in other states.
Right.
Yeah.
So they make money in Wyoming and they pay it in their home state. We just want to say, well, maybe they should pay that same tax here.
And there's probably 8 or 9 other proposals on the table of some small level tax and some large level, and if the broad and lower gets through, that's really the goal. Is we take some small, not very painful steps now, it saves us from a very painful step in the future. God keeps shining down on Wyoming. We got a huge boost in investment income this year that I don't think we can expect in future years. And so we've been blessed for another year with some more funding to help us try to figure out our long-term deficit, structural deficit problem. But I'll be happy if we make some small steps this year, and then we'll have a lot of discussion in the interim between the two of us and our committee on, in the budget session, really what we can bring to the entire legislature for
And certainly if the revenue recalibration study moves forward, I think that'll be a central focal point for many in Wyoming, and probably will alter what your committee ends up doing in the interim too, I would assert. So,
no doubt. I'm not quite as optimistic that that with the increase in earnings, the stock markets have been a little rocky. We're very dependent on the price of oil. Certainly, world economy. There's some interesting things happen with respect to interest rates. As an economist, I'm just not sharing a lot of optimism here. I'd rather be wrong, but in the meantime, we don't overspend, and so that's definitely my goal. I want those reserves to be here when it really is raining, and this is kind of a light fog drizzle, I assure you.
Well, let's hope that things get a little more sunny. I guess as we end our discussion today, it'd be very interesting to watch you both work not only in this session but in the interim with what is just a tough committee to be on. And I think
it is. There's no other chairman I'd rather be on it with. Representative Zwonitzer and I have chaired many committees together, and we have a really good working relationship. I respect him tremendously.
Well, best wishes to you both. Thanks. Representative Dan Zwonitzer and Senator Cale Case, chairman of their respective bodies' Revenue Committee. Thanks so much for joining us today. And next on Capital Outlook is our weekly Capital Outlook profile. Prior to the session starting, we had a chance to visit with Representative Albert Sommers, the Speaker Pro Temp of the House. We had a chance to visit with him on his beautiful ranch near Pinedale. Stay with us. And it's our pleasure now on this Capital Outlook profile to be at the home of Albert Sommers. Representative Sommers, you're in the beautiful Green River Valley, spectacular views that our viewers are actually looking at right now. Thank you for hosting us this evening.
Well, thank you, and hello, Wyoming, and welcome to Sublette County.
Yeah, you always open your web posts, and I want to tell our viewers you do a wonderful job in communicating with your constituents at a website that you put a lot of effort into at albertsommers.com, even during session. What's the background of that site?
So the background is the first session I ever went to, the local radio station said, "Hey, could you do a spot for us?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, this is how to do it. You take your iPhone and you record and send it in to us." And so that started the whole process. And so every day after session, I write a small press release and kind of fill in the highlights of the day. And I always start it with, "Hello, Sublette County." and then I send that to the radio station and to the newspapers. And then they print it and we put it on our website, and my wife puts it on my Facebook page. And people really appreciate it. I'm really thankful that I've done that.
And I think that if our viewers want to really follow the legislature, that's a great resource. Even though you talk about issues mostly that have to do with Sublette County, that's not always the case. And I think that our viewers might enjoy taking a look at what you do. So I appreciate that you do that, and I know many people do as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've had people comment from all around the state that look at it.
I'm looking out at the window at just your beautiful ranch. You're a third-generation rancher. This ranch has been in your family for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. Tell our viewers where we're at and what you do here.
Yeah, so we are in the Green River Valley, kind of in between Pinedale and Big Piney. And I'm the son of an old man that was the son of an old man. And so my grandfather was born in 1872, and he fought in the Spanish-American War. And then he moved west in about 1900, and he was a teacher. And so he moved west as a teacher, and then he began to homestead, and he met his wife-to-be, and they got married, and she was a teacher. And so they homesteaded this ranch, and she actually brought her mother in to help homestead. So I'm actually fourth generation, kind of in an odd way. I'm actually fifth generation in Wyoming, on the other side of my family. And so, it's that, and that's probably why I have such a great connection with education, is because my grandparents came in as teachers, And my grandfather died in 1928, leaving my grandmother, a widow woman, a single mother with 4 children at the brink of the Great Depression. Wow. And I get kind of emotional on this, but she was able to preserve the family ranch and the family by teaching. And she was actually a superintendent of schools in the county at one time. So my defensive education is part of my past. You know, we old family ranchers, you know, we're really defined by who came before us and the landscape we live in.
You went to the University of Wyoming. Mm-hmm. You studied electrical engineering.
I did.
Tell me about the bridge between growing up on the ranch, studying electrical engineering, and then coming back to the ranch.
So I was bound and determined in my early years that I was just going to move away from the ranch. And I was always a science and math geek. I mean, really geeky in that sort of way. And so when I went to the University of Wyoming, I started to get really more into ranching in high school and that sort of thing. But I still, my passion was still math and science. And at that time, the University of Wyoming had a bioengineering degree that was kind of a subset of the electrical engineering program. And I kind of liked that because I liked biological sciences and I liked the idea of electrical engineering when I kind of looked at that as a degree. And so I went in and I took the coursework and I graduated, and then reality struck. And I went on interview trips. And I went to all of these big cities and I looked at the cubicles I was going to have to sit in. And I finally took a job. It's kind of odd. I decided I'm not going to do that. But I took a job with Schlumberger Oilfield Services because they were hiring engineers to do field work. And this was 1981. And so I hired on with them. And if you'll recall in 1981, what happened? It was the great bust of 1981. And so before I ever got started in my career as an electrical engineer, I was going to work in Rock Springs. And so before I ever got started, I got laid off, and they said, well, we have an electronics company that's in California, and you can move to California and work for us there. And I said, no thanks. I think I'll just go back to the ranch, because I knew I could be with Schlumberger, I could come back to the ranch and work. And my father had a really major accident when I was a junior in college. And so I was needed here as well, and I didn't want to get too far away. And I never looked back. I love the ranch. I love the lifestyle. I believe in agriculture, and yeah, it was a good decision for me.
This ranch has a museum on its property. What's in the museum, and how is it used?
Yeah, so when I kind of have to tell the whole story here. So when my mother died in 2006, I sat my sister down at the kitchen table because her and I were partners on the ranch. And I said, well, what do we want to see for the future of this ranch? And we talked about that we didn't want to see it developed and that we wanted to preserve history in some way and preserve, frankly, some of the access that we had always granted. And so I kind of helped develop a plan, a conservation easement plan for this ranch to sell a conservation easement. And I talked to my neighbors, and one of my neighbors, who's a very large ranch, and we're a kind of a mid-sized ranch for this area, she said, I've been wanting to do that. So my neighbor Maggie Miller and we and my sister went together and we formed the Sommers Grindstone Project, which preserved over 19,000 acres of ranch land for future agricultural and wildlife use, and preserved some fishing access on the Green River. And so part of the money we took from that, we put into our old ranch buildings, and we had them fixed up by, strangely enough, now a representative in the Wyoming legislature again, Jim Roscoe, was the contractor. And so we fixed all that up. The Sublette County Historical Society has taken it over. We've granted them an easement and give them the buildings. And in the summer, they run that museum, which is Historical Museum of Ranching. And so inside of that, and it's also a living history museum where you can touch everything.
Hands-on.
Hands-on. And so we bring in school kids and get volunteers, and they cut firewood by hand and do leather work and clean eggs and pump water. And we even have 2 old crank phones hooked between 2 buildings. And so the kids can do that. And we have a phonograph that's a hand crank that you put the record on. And you know, everybody's on a phone now with their music, and they don't realize at one time you had to crank your phone up to, you know, basically crank your phone up to make it work.
I actually do remember that, and we actually still have records at our house. So, but I'm sure you're right. Many young folks don't. There was a time, though, that you wanted to serve in the Wyoming legislature. Tell me about your history in first local politics, and then why you wanted to become a legislator here in Wyoming.
Sure. So, from the time I got out of college, well, let's go back further. So I was student body president my senior year in high school. So I'd served on the student council, and I became student body president. And so politics was kind of in my blood. And even though my father was not into politics, his father and mother actually went to a national Republican convention back when, you know, you had to have horses to get out of here. And so kind of politics is probably a little bit in my blood. And then when I got out of college, I kind of helped the local Green River Valley Cattlemen's Association out. And then I got involved in local boards, and I eventually was on the local planning and zoning board for 9 years, and I got appointed by the governors of 3 different governors to task force, and finally the livestock board. And at that point in time, what happened was there was a boom in Sublette County. We all remember that. And a lot of revenue flowed out of Sublette County to the state. At about the same time that there was a redistricting effort after the census. And so Sublette County finally had enough people in it that it could justify, you know, probably its own representation. And so there was a redistricting because of, I think, frankly, because of Sublette County's presence in the budget and our the way we contributed to revenues. And so there was kind of a new seat opened up, and I thought, you know, this is the time. You know, the incumbent had decided not to, what would have been the incumbent had decided not to run. And I said, I want to take this on. And I'm a solution-oriented person. I really believe in integrity and civility, and I thought I had a place in the legislature.
Back to your website for just a moment. One of the things on your website that's striking to me is in the upper right-hand corner, you have John McCain's speech before the Senate, before the United States Senate in 2017. Why is that there?
I thought that was one of the most powerful speeches that I've ever listened to, and it's really about civility, and it's really about how we have to work together as a nation or a state or a people to accomplish the greater good of society. And it's not about me; it's about us. And I so much believe in that.
You've served on a lot of committees in your time. Important committees, joint appropriations, you were with school recalibration, on an opioid task force, you're worried about broadband service. Been involved and very much an early supporter of Endow. When you look at Wyoming 10 or 15 years from now, what are you thinking about the most? What I don't know if concern's the right word, but what's on your mind when we really look down the road for Wyoming?
Yeah, and I'm going to take it out a broader view first, because I'm concerned about rural America. And we are a piece of rural America. And rural America is struggling right now, and economically struggling, because all of the major plays are in the cities. All of the big businesses, all of the moves are into cities, and we're just flowing out. Or flowing into these cities. And in Wyoming, it's because we have no city. You know, Denver sits on the border of one part of Wyoming, Salt Lake on another, Billings on another, Idaho Falls and Boise, kind of out there, Rapid City, it's really hard for us to build a population center because we have all of these surrounding us. And so I do really worry about that. But here's my broadband pitch. People are going to get tired of living on top of each other, and they're going to want to live in more rural areas. And that can happen if we have a willingness to accept other people, and if we have good broadband. And so I think it's imperative that this state, and that's the reason I was a big supporter of Endow, not just the broadband Endow, but we have to look at where are we going to generate revenue in the future. We're going to still have minerals. Minerals is going to play a part for a long, long time in Wyoming. I'm not a doomsdayer on minerals. But it's going to dial back some. And we need to find those people that want to live in Wyoming, give them the opportunities and the ability to work from Wyoming. And the companies that may want to move to Wyoming, we have to work on that. And so I think Endow was critical in doing that. Take the air enhancement bill. We're one of the few states that you can't fly from Casper to Cheyenne, right? You can't fly from Jackson to Cody. You can't do business in Wyoming on an airplane. And so, but we very much at least need to be able to connect from Wyoming outward for everything from business to tourism.
You're in leadership. You're the Speaker Pro Temp of the House. Why has that been important for you? Why did you want to become part of the House leadership?
I think it goes back to why I wanted to become a legislator, and that is I'm solution oriented, and I want to see. I really believe in the integrity of the institution and the process, that is the legislature, and I very much am somebody that wants to help new people understand that role that we play. We are just there for a little piece of time, and it's our responsibility to maintain this state and grow this state while we have that little bit of limelight. And so I just want to be a cog in the process to make sure that we maintain that integrity of institution and process.
Representative Albert Sommers, thank you so much for hosting us in this beautiful place and joining us today on Capital Outlook. I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to visit with you more during the session.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
And again, our thanks to Representative Albert Sommers for allowing us to visit his beautiful ranch in Pinedale. His profiles I really enjoyed doing, Mr. Speaker. We had a chance to do one with you last year. Mr. President, we'll have to knock on your door maybe before next session.
I'm not very exciting, but you're welcome.
They're very enjoyable for us to visit with folks outside of Cheyenne. But welcome to the leadership here of the Wyoming Legislature, President Drew Perkins and Speaker Steve Harshman. Thanks for joining us again on Capital Outlook.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Interesting week this week. You got revenue news. We visited earlier in the show with the chairman of the revenue committees, got their thoughts. What was your reaction when you got the update to the Craig report, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think it's probably a little expected as we watched the price of oil over the last 3 months, and $170 million drop really across our accounts. It's a significant drop. I think to put it in context, the amount of revenue that is, I mean, that's equivalent to about a year's worth of 1 cent sales tax across the state. So it's a significant drop, but I think, those are things you're always kind of preparing and planning for, and so it wasn't a huge surprise.
Mr. President, you watch revenue figures all the time, but you got this report. Does it change the way at all that you want to lead this session because of a little less revenue perhaps than you thought coming in?
Well, no. The Craig was in October, was pretty optimistic for Craig, and so when it came in, I don't think the Speaker or I or most of us in the legislature that follow that, I don't think we were surprised by the dip. It was anticipated. In fact, I was relieved the dip was not larger, and there was some other news that was positive. The sales tax was up, which speaks well to our local economies and the retail that's going on around the state. So there's still obviously some optimism and people buying things. And the Speaker and I live just west of the Powder River Basin. We have a lot of people in Casper that do work out in those oil fields and those fields out there. And they're still busy. They're still working. There's a lot going on. So the price of oil goes up and down. We're in a world market, a world economy, and because of particularly the commodities that we have, we're very subject to those swings.
On the revenue topic still, there's been discussion this week on how best this legislature in this state can plan for its revenue needs in the future, and you're both aware of House Bill 126, which might create a revenue recalibration committee if it survives the House. First, it's come out of committee, Mr. Speaker. Do we plan as well as we should relative to our revenue needs in a newer economy, trying to diversify, understanding that non-energy industries may not contribute to the cash coffers of the state like energy industries do?
Well, I think it's an ongoing process because membership changes and you have new governors and people, change constantly and the situation changes, So I think that's an ongoing process and you're never at the finish line. And I think we're set up for that in the legislature with our committee system. We're all people that are going to go back home to our jobs, but our committees then will continue that focus in their certain areas, develop that expertise. This proposal is another kind of super committee or task force, probably more intentional about involving the executive branch, which is not, that's a good thing. And whether this is a mechanism or whether we push that out more as a interim topic for our standing committee, the Revenue Committee, and maybe other committees as well, will remain to be seen, I think.
Mr. President, one of the things noted in testimony in that committee was this might be a better opportunity to really involve the public with a committee that's structured with 5 folks from the executive or his appointees, and then 3 from each of your bodies. Is this an idea you're supporting, or?
I'm okay with the concept. I think it's a good concept. We have to continue to work. We have to continue to plan. We can always do a better job. We have a revenue committee, and I'm a believer in the revenue, the standing committee work and the committee work the legislature does. And so we have a revenue committee. I reconstituted that committee, asked longtime chairman of the Corporations Committee, Cale Case, who has a PhD in economics, to lead up the Senate Revenue Committee. And the point is to do this very thing that we're talking about. So move this concept forward is exactly why I constituted that committee the way that I did. I've got some other great senators on there, provide that support. That committee's process is set up to take public input. We have public hearings. We can do those around the state. We can expand that. As Management Council, we have flexibility to add people to that if we want to do it to those committees. And we certainly can make specific invitations and work closely with the executive branch to bring in their expertise and their view on these issues and work together a good project. We did that because this is exactly what we need to do going forward. We need to look at broadening, at expanding and diversifying our economic base, particularly as we'll have to do this if we're going to do economic development, if we're going to try and stabilize. The object is not to increase the tax burden on our citizens, but to stabilize our revenue streams.
On to a different topic. There's bills relative to how primary voting will be structured in Wyoming. Whether it's a ranked system, an open primary where you just rank 1 through 8, however many candidates there are, who you like, or maybe not allowing folks to change their party affiliation up to voting day. What are your thoughts on the way Wyoming conducts its primaries? Mr. President, let's let you go first with this one.
Oh, well, thank you. I believe in the political system that we have. I believe that it's a party system, and I think that that's not a bad way to be. I understand the frustrations when you have a party that's as dominant at this point in time as the Republican Party, but you don't have to go very long back in history when that was not the case. And so things will change. And so, but the party system, the primary is an opportunity for parties to pick their candidates. As far as the deadlines and the party switching, I think letting that happen all the way up through Election Day kind of violates the concept of a party system. I think that, I don't know, you don't want to take it back too far, but probably doing it at some point before the mail-in ballots or absentee ballot voting can start probably makes some sense, and we ought to have a good discussion about it and see where that lands.
Mr. Speaker, where do you land on primaries in Wyoming?
Well, I don't think our system's broke, and there's a lot of, I think if you ask the average Wyoming person out there working today or a senior citizen who's voted many, many elections in Wyoming today, I don't think they're going to have much of a problem with it. I don't think they'd say the system's broke. But I do think you continually kind of look at some of these issues. And I think the president said it well. I'm not a real fan of the rank system. I don't think, I think it's, more the party system. And whether we move that party change date, we move it, there's a point where you can go too far with anything as well. And so we'll just look at all these proposals as they come through and evaluate them as they come.
This legislature will be meeting for 35 days, theoretically providing 5 additional days for the budget session upcoming. Is this going to be a trend now to allow the legislature a little more time to work with the budget session? And will there be any impact of shortening and having the general session of just 35 days if that calendar moves forward? Mr. Speaker, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think our constitutional limit is 60 days. And of course, for 90 years, we met every other year, like North Dakota and Texas do. I think what we've run into is that as our budgets become just kind of more involved and there's more to do, I think, and that's really all our lives. It's just more. We've gotten busier as a society, but I think in the legislature it's gotten busier. And I think talking with the president, we talked about this concept, and you go back to the 70s when this idea first came, there was a lot of debate on 30-30. The Senate actually wanted the 30-30, did not want the 2/3 supermajority in the budget session, and the House was pushing for this 40-20 thing back in the 70s. And I think what we've discovered is that the 20 is just a little too short. And I think sometimes in the 40, I think we thought we could give a few days over. Look, traditionally though, we've really run more of about a 37, 38-day session. We really haven't used all those 40 days.
Couple in the bank.
Couple in the bank, and I think we're going to try this concept to move it out and give a little more time when we develop the budget.
Mr. President, is that going to make the budget process a little more maybe understandable, better debated, better budgets because of adding maybe another 5 days to the budget session next year?
I don't know if it'll change the budget itself, that process that much. I think what it does do is it will take a little, won't very much up. It'll take a little bit of the pressure off, particularly joint appropriations, to get that done. As we struggle with swings in finances and things like that, need some more time. They've got to work the budget hard. It will obviously give legislators a more chance to participate in that, and I think understand it. I think the process will probably stay very close to what it was once the budget actually goes out and debated. But having a little bit more time also gives, obviously it's not just the budget, there's a lot of other legislation that happens during the budget session, and just to make that so you can just slow down and try and do good work, whether it's the budget or whether it's something else, makes that we're trying to do a good job watching the budget, but also when the other things that we work on, make sure that they're good.
The rules wouldn't change, though, relative to the amount of votes a bill needs to get introduced in a budget session. Is that correct?
It's funny you ask.
Funny you should say that.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I have a bill to go back in and our original Constitution, our founders, and really it's not favored in Western democracy, these super majorities. It's majority rule. I mean,
to introduce a bill.
Really, for anything. I mean, we're elected to represent our people, and our votes should all count the same for our people across the state. Well, in the 70s, this idea of a 2/3, and it was really to focus the attention on the budget session, and maybe less important bills would come later. But really, I think it hasn't worked on what we're doing. And I think as a House member, my term 60 days, right, to represent our people. And so if you say a third of that, Representative Harshman, your vote only counts for a third, all right? And so it takes 2/3 to get an idea passed through, and we've had a lot of those over the years. I think in the late 70s, both the House voted to establish a medical school in Wyoming. 35 votes, didn't have 40. It got reintroduced in the Senate. It was an idea that was supported, 19 votes in the Senate, one shy. And so you think, how would that have changed Wyoming 50 years ago? So I think it's more about just this being able to represent your people. So I'm bringing a bill, hopefully then it can get on the ballot for voters to go in and really return our Constitution back the way it was originally drafted, to get rid of these undemocratic supermajority. I just, but that debate's coming, I hope.
We'll look forward to watching that. Federal government's still in shutdown as we film this morning. We're filming this on Thursday morning. Has that impacted state government or this legislature or anything at all that you're doing in this session?
Really, in all honesty, we haven't felt much impact from it. We had some worries about distribution of like federal mineral royalties and some things like that, and where those payments would come to the state. They are continuing to come to the state, at least for now. So I just haven't felt much impact from it, nor heard much impact from that's come to my attention.
Agreed, Mr. Speaker?
Well, and the President and I both talked, and he's absolutely right. I think the thing we've talked about is it's impacting some people that are federal workers, and we've talked about that. As far as affecting state operations, not much at this point. But we've talked about it, and we're continually getting briefed on it.
Well, again, thank you both for joining us here on Capital Outlook. We'll look forward to seeing you next week as well. Our final segment is a visit, her first televised interview with Wyoming's new state auditor, Kristi Racines. That's next on Wyoming PBS. Stay with us. And in our last segment for this week's second Capital Outlook, it's our pleasure to be joined by Wyoming's new auditor, Auditor Kristi Racines. Welcome, Madam Auditor.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you. You've been in the office for a few days. How's the transition went for you? How's that process worked?
You know, really good. Transitions are, by their nature, a challenging time. Humans don't love change, as you know. So, but it's been good. It's a gap. I'm learning about the staff, they're learning about me, but mostly it's been overwhelmingly positive.
You really ran on, you stated very clearly in your campaign that you were concerned about accountability, efficiency, and commitment to the job. But certainly it all, to me, revolved around transparency of the office. In fact, there are lawsuits pending against your predecessor. What is your vision now that you've been in the office just a little bit on the work Wyoming needs to do to really become more transparent? We're not rated very well by some organizations today.
No, that was definitely a theme of the summer for not just me, but everyone running for state auditor. I think it's really come out that this is a gap we have, being able to produce particularly financial information quickly and in a way that folks can understand so that we know where our tax dollars are going. As far as vision for the office, there's two issues that we're dealing with right now. So first, there is the active lawsuit, and that just had to do with the state auditor producing 5 years worth of expenditure records and getting those out the door. So that needs to be taken care of, obviously, but also going forward. One of the reasons that was so challenging is there's so much private information mixed in with data that can be public. Right now, that's a really manual process to try to sort that out. For instance,
somebody who may have had mental health services that the state paid for, they wouldn't want their name to be known that they were receiving such services, so there's some confidentiality things there.
Absolutely. There's some questions of confidentiality of what folks want to be public, but I mean, a lot of that is just protected by law, so it would actually be a violation of laws if it were to be released. You know, it's either private health information, things like that, but that is intermingled in the system with a lot of records that can and should be public. So again, divvying that up right now is a very manual process. It can be done, but it takes a real human to sort through those records and sift them out. So we have the issue of looking backwards and making sure that information is available, but also looking for a more comprehensive solution going forward so that it's not such a manually intensive process.
You and Governor Gordon, prior to the election, announced that you thought a working group should be created to enhance transparency. Are you following through with that? Where is that particular process at?
Absolutely. We've had one meeting of the working group so far, and we have another one scheduled this week. We're going to be hearing from actually Open the Books to hear about their work in this area, and then also really working to define some of our first goals and the scope that we want the working group to tackle. As you know, one of the biggest challenges of some of these groups is there's so many things to be done. There's so many improvements that can be made, but we need to focus on a couple things to start out with, low-hanging fruit where we think we can make some strides and get some momentum in that direction.
From what you know now, and I know that it's only been a small amount of time that you've been in office, can you move Wyoming's needle on transparency in your first term?
In my first term, I think absolutely. You know, I talked a lot over the summer, and I used sort of a silly example, but I think some folks envision a big red transparency button that somebody was just refusing to push. You know, just push the button and it'll all be out there. Unfortunately, there's some real limitations to the data and the systems that we have that avoid that. You know, that make that not possible. I purposely avoided saying I can fix this in one day because I don't think it can be. If you fixed it in one day, we would be releasing a huge amount of information that is not public and should not be public, like those private health payments or whatever. Can we move the needle on this in 4 years? Absolutely, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Madam Auditor, you'll also now sit on boards that start to make decisions about public infrastructure needs around the state. How do you go about educating yourself? This is a big state.
It's huge.
And your background, you are a CPA and a Spanish major. And we know you can speak some Spanish in college, but there's a lot to learn about the infrastructure needs of Wyoming. How do you plan to channel through that process? Because you'll start to be making important decisions very soon.
Absolutely. We have our first SLIB meeting this Thursday.
State Land and Investments Board meeting.
Yes. So I apologize. You should never use acronyms.
There are plenty in Cheyenne
wide
that
audience.
I think our viewers do know about.
I go about it the way I would learn about anything. I know there's going to be a steep learning curve. I know a little, but I think it's more important to recognize what I don't know. You know, in my prior life, I audited the Business Council, and that was my first interaction with learning about the way some of these grants and loans worked, the payback on those, and some of the projects they went out to. So what I've been doing, you know, since the election is literally reading statutes, reading grant programs, and reading rules relating to those programs. You know, as far as learning about the individual communities, I've been meeting with stakeholders that are interested in the specific projects coming before SLIB, before the State Loan and Investment Board. Apart from that, I just plan to go out and visit communities. I hope I have a good background living in a variety of sizes of towns. I know I live in Cheyenne now, which is the big city, but I've also, you know, I was raised in substantially smaller towns. So hopefully I will at least have the right mindset to be able to make sure I remember how different our communities are and how different their needs are.
Were there staffing decisions that you needed to make, Madam Auditor, when you first came on board?
Absolutely. So one of the auditor's office is relatively small comparatively. It's about 25 people, but the most important decision that the state auditor makes in that regard is choosing of a deputy.
And you've done that?
Yes, yes. So I have Edie Troutwine joining me as deputy, and she's going to be fantastic.
Both of you had experience together in the Wyoming Judicial Branch at the Supreme Court. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Your background, Madam Auditor, you have a CPA.
Correct.
It's not a requirement for the job. From what you know about the job, should it be?
You know, I think it's extremely helpful to have a really strong financial accounting background for the job. A CPA is checking a box that's nice. I don't necessarily think it should be a requirement of the job.
Your office today is not where it will be a few months from now. You'll be moving to the remodeled Herscher building. What are your thoughts on the need to move from where you're at to where you're going to be?
I think everyone is excited. As you know, there's been some challenges for many agencies trying to find temporary space, you know, outside the Capitol and the Herscher building while they're working on that. So I know that you know, we anticipate being in the rented space for another, you know, 6 to 8 months, but I think that the staff is very eager to you know, actually call somewhere home and grow roots, because I think that target has moved quite a few times. So
I'm not exaggerating, and I think you'll back me up, but when you go see your receptionist, the floor in her office is tilted.
Yes, it was tilted. There was a platform built to...
And that platform is a triangle. It's not... am I wrong?
It's so she doesn't roll away.
And nor will her pencils or,
yes,
or
yes.
everything else. So it might be a good time.
It served the purpose for sure, but everyone is very, very excited to get back into the Hirschler building. One of the other things right now, too, is we're on 2 different floors. And that physical separation is tough when we really are all working towards the same goal. And it's just easier to stay together when we'll be all together.
Conclude back to where we started. You're going to try to make your office more efficient, more transparent, to be more accountable to Wyoming citizens. Do you understand well enough the fiscal needs that will require? Do you plan that there'll be some expenses coming from your office to then realize these efficiencies?
There will be some expenses involved in that. You know, I think the gold standard, the goal would be to have a very easy to use public-facing website where you can go in and see data about expenditures, about anything you want, about contracts, that sort of thing. Software and management of those things and hosting of those sites usually cost money. Is it something that we can do in-house? That will certainly be an option, we explore. I think it's a question of what sort of product do we want? What do we want the sustainability of that product to be? Homegrown systems are fantastic in cost, but as we've learned in the state, sometimes those are problematic down the road when no one knows how to work on them or no one knows the platform on which they were built, that sort of thing. So a request for proposal has gone out, and we have responses back to build a transparency platform for the state. Those have not been opened. We're working through that procurement process, which is important. So the dollar figure that this actually runs, I don't have today. I think regardless, I'm hoping we can make some strides even without a whole lot of investment.
Madam Auditor, when you're ready to show off that system, we'll come visit again.
Absolutely. I'll call you first.
We would love to be a part of that. It's an important issue for Wyoming.
Yes, absolutely.
We appreciate your time with us today on
Thank you so much for having me.
Best wishes in your new position.
Thanks,
Thank you so much. And that's a wrap for week 2 of Capital Outlook here on Wyoming PBS. Next week, the Wyoming Legislature will have a 4-day week. They won't be working Monday on Martin Luther King Day, but we'll be back here on Friday, and we'll have a profile this week of a Wyoming senator. In fact, he's the longest-serving legislator in Wyoming's history. That's Senator Charles Scott. That and a lot more next Friday on Capital Outlook. Thanks for joining us.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.